I still have the charger. That's the thing that keeps coming back to me months later. I still have the original charging cable. It's coiled up in the junk drawer in my kitchen, tangled around a dead pen and a coupon for a pizza place that closed 2 years ago. I look at it sometimes, this thin white wire that didn't do anything wrong. It charged things, it worked. I threw a perfectly good relationship with a cable in the trash because of a phone. That sounds insane. It is insane. But here's what I've been sitting with lately. What I've been turning over and over at 2 a.m. when the apartment is quiet and I should be sleeping, but instead I'm doing math in my head. It wasn't really about the cable. The cable was just the first thread, and once I pulled it, I couldn't stop until the whole thing unraveled. I want to tell you about a philosopher, not because I'm that guy who opens with a philosophy reference to sound smart. I'm not. I failed 2 philosophy courses in college, and the only reason I passed the third was because the professor felt sorry for me. I want to tell you about this man because when I found out what happened to him, something in my chest went very still. Like when you're reading something and you realize it's describing you, and you go back and read it again slower, and it still describes you, and then you just sit there for a while. His name was Denis Diderot. He was a Frenchman. 18th century, one of those rare people who was genuinely, embarrassingly brilliant. He helped create one of the first encyclopedias in history. He was a thinker, a writer, a philosopher, and he was poor, comfortably poor maybe. The kind of poor where you don't notice it because everything around you matches. His desk was old. His rugs were old. His chair was old. His life had a coherence to it that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with proportion. And then someone gave him money. Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, a woman who had actual armies and actual palaces and actual power over actual human lives, was a fan of Diderot's work. She heard he was struggling. So she bought his library for what would be roughly $50,000 today. Let him keep the books. Just handed him the money. He didn't know what hit him. He did what any of us would do. He treated himself. He went out and bought a robe, not a regular robe, a scarlet dressing gown, silk probably, the kind of thing you wear and feel different in, feel elevated in, feel like a version of yourself that you always suspected existed but never had the evidence to confirm. He brought it home, he put it on, he stood at his desk to write, and that's when he noticed his desk, really noticed it, maybe for the first time in years, the scratches, the ink stains. The way the wood had worn down and softened and gone gray at the edges. It hadn't bothered him before. Why would it? It was just the desk. But now standing there in this magnificent robe, looking down at this ruined piece of furniture, the contrast was unbearable. He replaced the desk, then the rug, then the curtains, then the chair. One by one, every single thing he owned became inadequate. Every object in his life that had been perfectly fine the day before became an offense. He spent months on it. Months obsessing, renovating, replacing, upgrading. He turned his comfortable, humble study into a showroom, and at the end he was broke again. He wrote an essay about it. Regrets on parting with my old dressing gown. And in it, he wrote a line that has been haunting people for 2.5 centuries. I was the absolute master of my old dressing gown, but I have become a slave to my new one. That line hit me somewhere below the ribs, because I know that feeling. I know exactly what it means to stop being the master of something and start being its servant. I know what it means to buy a thing and then spend the rest of your time protecting it, curating it, justifying it, building a life around it instead of living a life in spite of it. I know it because I've done it, more than once. And I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened. The phone was the robe. I want to be clear about that from the start. The phone was the robe and everything else, the charger, the case, the earbuds, the eventually necessary upgrade to my apartment setup because the phone looked wrong against my old nightstand. All of that was the desk, the rug, the curtains. In order, like dominoes that had been standing there waiting for me to walk in and sneeze. I had a perfectly functional phone. I want you to understand this. The phone worked. It made calls. It sent texts. The battery was maybe 80% of what it used to be, which meant I had to plug it in before bed instead of leaving it until morning. An inconvenience that amounted to approximately 4 seconds of additional effort per day. The screen had a small crack in the corner, bottom left, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I was not suffering, but I'd been seeing ads for the new model for 3 months. They're good at that. They know to show you the thing repeatedly before it's available, so that by launch day you've already been wanting it for a season. By the time I walked into that store, I wasn't making a decision. The decision had been made for me, carefully, expensively, by people with advanced degrees in behavioral psychology who spent their days figuring out how to make people like me feel incomplete. The salesperson was kind. She had an easy smile and she handed me the phone to hold and I held it. And look, I'm not going to pretend this is only about manipulation. There's something real about holding a well-made object, the weight of it. The way the titanium frame had a temperature to it, almost cool, almost alive. It felt like the future. It felt like something. I said I needed to think about it. I stood outside the store for 4 minutes. I went back in. $1,200. That number sat fine with me in the moment. I'd done the rationalization by then. The whole architecture was in place. It was for work. I use my phone constantly. I check emails on it. I take photos for projects. It is legitimately a productivity tool. I needed it to function at peak capacity. I was investing in my efficiency. The $1,200 wasn't spending. It was spending smart. I walked out feeling the particular warmth of having made a decision you're not sure about but have already committed to. I got in my car. I looked at the phone. Then I looked at my charging cable, coiled in the cup holder. That old fraying cable, the one I'd had for 2 years, the one that had charged every phone I'd owned since I bought it at an airport for too much money. I looked at it, then I looked at the phone again, the titanium, the clean lines, the craftsmanship. I thought, that looks wrong, not dangerous wrong, not broken wrong, just aesthetically, proportionally, in terms of the story I was now telling about myself and my things wrong. You don't plug something like this into something like that. It would be like wearing a tuxedo and carrying a plastic grocery bag, technically functional, but visually, atmospherically, narratively, wrong. I bought the MagSafe charger on the way home. $40, fine, still fine. $40 is nothing. I had just spent $1,200. What's 40? That math, the relative to what I just spent math, is one of the most effective cognitive traps our brains have ever devised. The anchor price warps your sense of value. The $1,200 doesn't go away when you're deciding whether to spend 40. Instead, it becomes the reference point. 40 is small compared to 1,200, so 40 feels free. Nothing is free. When I got home, I set the phone on my nightstand. And I want to slow down here, because this is where Didrot stood at his desk in the scarlet robe. This is the moment. This is where the spiral doesn't start. It was already in motion, but where it becomes visible. I looked at the phone on my nightstand. Then I looked at my phone case, my old case. Black plastic, slightly scratched, with a small divot on the back left corner where I dropped it on a sidewalk 18 months ago. A perfectly good case. A case that had protected my previous phone, which was now in a drawer somewhere, already forgotten. I thought, that looks wrong. The case was fine. The case worked. The case in any meaningful sense of the word was not the problem, but it was the wrong case for this phone. Not technically. It wouldn't fit, obviously. A new phone takes a new case, but spiritually. The energy of it. I had just spent $1,200 on a device that represented a certain version of me, a capable, efficient, forward-thinking person with good taste and high standards, and I was going to put it in a $15 Amazon case with slightly blurry branding. The leather case was $60, then the AirPods. This one was easy to justify, because the old wired headphones actually didn't fit the new port, so technically I had to buy headphones. The question was just which ones. And the answer was the AirPods Pro, because I already had the phone, already had the charger, already had the case, and I was building a coherent system. You don't finish most of a puzzle and leave 3 pieces out. $250. Within 48 hours of buying the phone, I had spent $1,600. The phone had demanded its accessories, and I had supplied them, efficiently, almost automatically, like I was fulfilling a contract I didn't remember signing. And here's the part that took me a long time to understand. I was happy with it. That's the insidious thing. I want to be clear that I'm not describing buyer's remorse. I didn't feel sick about it. I felt satisfied. I felt like I had done something right. I had a system. Everything matched. The phone and its accessories formed a coherent unit, and that coherence felt like accomplishment, felt like taste, felt like being a person who makes good decisions. The Didrot effect doesn't feel like a trap when you're in it. It feels like progress. It feels like leveling up. And because it feels like progress, you keep going. Because there's always something else that doesn't match. There's always something adjacent that the upgraded item is now adjacent to, and the contrast creates a new dissatisfaction, and the dissatisfaction creates a new purchase, and the purchase creates a new satisfaction, and the satisfaction lasts for approximately 3 days before the next mismatch becomes visible. This is the engine. This is what powers it. Not greed, not stupidity, not a moral failing, just the perfectly ordinary human need for coherence. I want to tell you about the Peloton. Not mine. I've never owned a Peloton, and after everything I'm about to describe, I hope I never will, but someone I know. We'll call him Marcus, which isn't his name, but he reads the same corners of the internet I do, and I don't want him to recognize himself in this. Marcus decided he wanted to get fit. This is a reasonable thing to want. He bought a Peloton, $1,500. He set it up in the corner of his living room and started the classes, and they were good, and he liked them, and he was genuinely using it. This is not a story about a dusty exercise bike. Marcus was using it 4 times a week. He was getting stronger. He was making progress toward a real, legitimate goal, but he didn't look like the instructors. He was riding in old cotton t-shirts and basketball shorts from college, and the people on the screen, perfectly lit, absurdly fit, wearing $200 worth of technical cycling gear, looked nothing like him. And he started to feel it, not consciously, not as a clear thought, but as a low background frequency, a sense that he was doing the thing wrong, that real cyclists wore real cycling clothes, that he wasn't yet the person he was trying to become, and the proof was in the t-shirt. He bought the cycling shoes, then the shorts, then the top, then because the bike was now a real commitment. He was a cyclist, genuinely, he had the gear to prove it. The cluttered living room felt wrong. A serious athlete doesn't work out surrounded by old magazines and a coffee table covered in unopened mail. He needed a space, a zone. He moved things, bought a yoga mat, got a set of dumbbells, hung a small TV on the wall so he could see the instructor without craning his neck. By the time he was done, the Peloton hadn't cost $1,500. Marcus has never done the full math. I don't think he wants to. But here's what haunts me about his story, and about Deidraht's, and about mine. None of those purchases were crazy in isolation. The cycling shoes make sense for a cyclist. The proper shorts reduce chafing, which is a real concern. A dedicated workout space genuinely can improve motivation. Every single step of the chain had a justification. Every link was logical. The chain itself was the problem. There's a concept I keep coming back to, and it doesn't have a clean name that I've found, but I think of it as the anchor item. The anchor is the thing that resets your baseline. Before the phone, my baseline was a certain kind of person, a person who uses functional cables and doesn't think too hard about cases. After the phone, my baseline shifted. I became, in my own internal story, a person who has a certain kind of setup, a person with standards, and everything in my life that didn't meet those new standards created friction. Not external friction, nobody else cared, but internal friction, a small persistent wrongness. The anchor doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be a luxury item. It just has to shift your self-image. When you buy a beautiful new couch, the old coffee table looks wrong. When you buy new shoes, your jeans look worn. When you renovate your kitchen, the living room looks like a different house. The anchor item isn't responsible for these feelings. It's just the stone that drops in the water. The ripples are automatic. You don't choose them, which is why the advice, just don't want nice things, is completely useless. You can want nice things. There's nothing wrong with nice things. The problem is the failure to account for what the nice thing is going to demand once it arrives. The failure to add up the chain reaction cost before you start the chain. Let me walk you through the math. Say you decide to renovate your kitchen. You budget $10,000 for new cabinets. This seems reasonable. You find the cabinets you want, white, modern, clean, and you have them installed and they look incredible. They genuinely do. You stand in your kitchen and feel the specific satisfaction of a room that has been improved. But now your refrigerator is yellow. It wasn't yellow before. It was just the refrigerator. Now it's yellow. Now it's visually wrong, standing there in your sleek modern kitchen, humming its yellowish hum, aging badly against the crisp white cabinets. It works perfectly. It keeps things cold at exactly the correct temperature. There is nothing functionally wrong with it, but it clashes. It breaks the coherence. So you spend $2,000 on a stainless steel fridge. Now the fridge and cabinets are a unit. They're a vision. They're what you wanted. Except now you're standing on vinyl flooring, and the vinyl floor, which you never once thought about before the renovation, now looks, well, it looks cheap. It looks like a before photo. The kitchen has evolved past it. $5,000 for hardwood. The kitchen is done. It looks like a magazine. You've spent $17,000 instead of $10,000, but you have the kitchen you wanted, and it's worth it, and you're happy. Except it's an open concept house. You're standing in your magazine kitchen, and you can see the living room, and the living room looks like a dump. The old brown sofa doesn't match anything anymore. The paint looks wrong. The room that was perfectly comfortable 6 months ago now looks like it belongs to a different house, a lesser house, a before-renovation house, and the contrast is unbearable because you're looking at it from your new kitchen. You paint the downstairs. You buy a new sectional. The $10,000 kitchen renovation ends at $35,000, and here is the terrible truth that lives inside this math. You were happy with that kitchen before you changed it. The yellow refrigerator didn't bother you. The vinyl floor was fine. The brown sofa was comfortable. You lived in that house for years without noticing a single one of those things. The renovation created the dissatisfaction. The upgrade manufactured the problem it was supposed to solve. I've been thinking about what it means to own something. Deidraht put it better than I can. He was the master of his old robe. With the new one, he became the slave. When I had my old phone with its cracked screen, I used it without ceremony. I threw it in my bag. I took photos of dumb things. Once I left it face down in a puddle for about 30 seconds and then laughed about it. The crack had already happened. The screen was already damaged. There was a freedom in that, the freedom of something that has already been hurt, that can't be made worse by ordinary living. When I got the new phone, something shifted. I bought a case for it, then I worried the case wasn't adequate. I started putting it face down on tables more carefully. I became aware of how I set it down, gently, on soft surfaces, keeping it away from keys. Once I was at a friend's house and he offered to take a group photo, and I handed him my phone and then watched him hold it, and felt a kind of tightness in my chest that I'm a little embarrassed to admit to. I had stopped using the phone. I had started protecting it. This is the trade you make. You buy the nicer thing and in exchange you give up a certain ease with it. You become its curator. You enter a kind of anxious relationship with the object, not quite ownership, not quite partnership, something more fraught than either. The object has a fragility now, a preciousness that demands your attention and care and worry. The expensive white couch you can't eat near, the new car you park far from other cars, the Rolex you're afraid to scratch. You thought you were acquiring something, but you were also acquiring the maintenance of something. And maintenance has a cost that never appears on the price tag. Here is a thing that happened to a man in France in 1765 that also happened to lottery winners in the 20th century. There have been studies, I'm not going to pretend to cite them with precision, but the pattern is well documented enough that it's become a kind of cultural common knowledge that lottery winners frequently end up worse off financially than they were before the win. Some of them end up in bankruptcy. Some of them end up isolated, having burned through relationships as rapidly as the money. Some of them say, in interviews, that winning the lottery was the worst thing that ever happened to them. This sounds insane. How can winning money make things worse? But think about what a lottery jackpot is. It's an anchor item. It's the most powerful anchor item imaginable. It doesn't just shift your baseline, it detonates it. Suddenly your old house is wrong. Your old car is wrong. Your old neighborhood is wrong. Your old friends don't fit anymore, not because they changed, but because the story you're telling about yourself has changed, and they're a piece of the old story, and the old story feels small now. So you upgrade the house, which demands new furniture, which demands a new neighborhood, which demands different friends, which demands the vacations that kind of person takes, which demands the clothes for those vacations, which demands the luggage for those clothes. And all of it, every single link, is just Diderot standing at his desk in the scarlet robe, looking at the ink stains on the wood, feeling the wrongness of the contrast, reaching for his wallet. We think we own our things own us. I want to talk about the specific cruelty of modern marketing, because what happened to Diderot was natural, a human brain doing what human brains do, seeking coherence, trying to match the internal story to the external environment. It wasn't manufactured, it wasn't engineered, it was just the psychology firing in its ordinary way. What happens to us now is different. There are people, smart people, creative people, people who went to school for this, whose entire job is to trigger the Diderot effect in you, deliberately, precisely, at the exact moment you're most vulnerable to it. When you buy the phone, you get ads for the case within hours. When you buy the bike, you get the shoes, the shorts, the subscription. When you renovate the kitchen, the furniture store knows. They know because they have your data. They know what you've looked at, what you've bought, what you've searched for. They know the anchor items you've recently acquired. And they know, because this is their entire business, this is what they've spent billions of dollars studying, exactly which items will feel like natural complements. Exactly which follow-up purchase will feel not like an additional spend, but like a completion. The ecosystem is designed to feel inevitable. The upgrade chain is engineered. You are not making choices in these moments. You are following a script that was written before you walked in the door. And the scariest part is that the script feels like your own thoughts. The voice that says the cable looks wrong next to the new phone, that's your voice. You generated that thought. It arose in you naturally, from your genuine aesthetic sense, from your real desire for coherence. The marketing didn't put the thought there. It just arranged the conditions for the thought to arise. That's a very different kind of manipulation. And a much harder one to defend against. There's a particular madness in what I call the identity purchase. The Peloton wasn't just a bike. Marcus wasn't buying exercise equipment. He was buying a version of himself. A cyclist. A person who gets up at 6 a.m. and has the discipline and the gear and the commitment to the body that cycling requires. The bike was proof of the identity. It was the anchor that made the identity real. The problem is that identities are expensive. Not the identity itself. The identity is free. You can be anything you want inside your own head. But once you've purchased an anchor item, once you've staked external money on an internal story, you have to maintain the story. The accessories are maintenance costs. The gear, the space, the subscription, all of it is paying rent on an identity you decided to inhabit. I've been a cyclist. I've been a runner. I've been a chef. I went through a period where I bought quite a lot of kitchen equipment, and I was genuinely using it, and I was genuinely cooking, but there was also a level of kitchen investment that was not about cooking, but about being a person who cooks. About the identity of the home cook with the good knives and the cast iron and the copper-bottomed pans. I have 3 copper-bottomed pans that I use approximately twice a year. They were not cheap. And here's what gets me. Looking back, the identity was real. I did cook. I did enjoy it. The cooking was genuine and the investment was not entirely unjustified. But the scale of the investment, the totality of what I spent maintaining that identity, went far beyond what the activity required. The activity required 1 good pan and some patience. The identity required a kitchen that looked like an identity. When you shift the question from, what do I need for this activity, to what does a person who does this activity own, you have moved from purchasing to self-construction. And self-construction has no natural ceiling. There's always a more fully realized version of the self you could be buying. I want to tell you about a house. A family, not mine, but close enough that I watched it happen in real time, bought their dream house. They'd been saving for years. They were disciplined about it, not the kind of people who throw money around, genuinely careful with what they had. And they found the house and they bought it, and it was the right house, the one they'd wanted, in the neighborhood they'd hoped for, with the backyard they'd imagined. It needed some work, not desperate work, not structural problems, just the cosmetic stuff, paint that had aged, carpet that was ready to be replaced, a kitchen that was functional but hadn't been updated since the 90s. Normal things you expect when you buy a house with some history to it. They started with the carpet. They pulled up the carpet and found hardwood underneath, good hardwood, original to the house but worn and scratched. They refinished it. It was beautiful, genuinely beautiful. The floors came alive. Now the paint looked wrong. Not wrong like before. Now it looked actively wrong, the way things look when they're standing next to something better than themselves. The off-white from 1987 had been tolerable with the old carpet. With the refinished floors, it looked like a mistake. They repainted. The kitchen, then the master bath, then the guest bath because you can't redo the master and not the guest. Then the back porch because the porch had been an afterthought, and now they saw the house clearly, and the porch was not what the house deserved. A year after buying their dream house, they had spent $40,000 on it. They weren't done. The living room furniture didn't match the house they now had. Not the house they'd bought. That house was gone, renovated into something nicer. But the house they now had, the one with the floors and the paint and the restored porch. The furniture was from the old apartment. It was fine furniture, but it was apartment furniture, small scale and practical, and it looked stranded in these rooms. New furniture. The thing that gets me, the thing that I think about when I think about Deirdre at his desk, is that they loved their old apartment furniture. They'd picked it out together. Some of it they'd saved for. It had been with them through things, had been there for dinners and bad days and good days and late nights, and they were fond of it, and they had no complaints about it. And then they bought a dream house, and the furniture started to look wrong, and they got rid of it. The house ate the furniture. The dream became a system, and the system demanded to be fed. So what do? That's the question. And I've spent enough time on this, thinking about it, watching it happen to myself and to people I know, that I have some answers. They're not perfect answers. They're not the answers of someone who has solved the problem, but they're the answers of someone who has at least looked at the problem clearly. The first thing you do is change the question. When you're looking at an anchor item, a car, a renovation, a luxury purchase of any kind, the question is not, can I afford this? The question is, can I afford the system? Because you are never just buying the item. You are installing a new baseline. You are setting a new floor for your own coherence. You are inviting a set of subsequent demands that will arrive whether you're ready for them or not. So write them down. Before you buy the phone, write down what the phone will demand. The case, the charger, maybe a new bag that fits the ecosystem, the apps and subscriptions, the replacement plan, add it up, not the price tag the system cost. Can you afford the system? If the answer is no, don't buy the anchor. Not because you're being punished, not because you don't deserve nice things, but because inviting an anchor item you can't afford to maintain is inviting Deirdre's robe into your life, and you know how that ended. The second thing sounds simple and is not. Cap your inventory. When something comes in, something goes out. This sounds like minimalism, and it is adjacent to minimalism, but the motivation is different. The motivation isn't aesthetics or virtue. The motivation is cognitive. When you have less stuff, each thing you have is more fully yours. You see it clearly. You use it fully. You aren't managing a collection. You're using a set of tools. The Deirdre effect thrives on accumulation because accumulation creates contrast. Every new thing makes the old things visible by comparison. If you're constantly adding, you're constantly creating new opportunities for the existing inventory to look wrong. But if one thing leaves every time one thing arrives, the inventory stays constant and the comparisons stay bounded. Donate it, sell it, throw it out if it's broken. The point is that it leaves. This also has a secondary effect that I've found unexpectedly powerful. It makes you think harder before buying. When you know the price of a new pair of shoes is an existing pair of shoes, you start weighing things differently. You think about what you'd have to give up, not just what you'd be gaining. That calculation changes the purchase rate dramatically. The third thing is the hardest one: downgrade on purpose. I don't mean this as a poverty cosplay. I don't mean it as a philosophical statement or a social performance. I mean it as a practical strategy. The anchor item sets the floor of your identity maintenance costs. If your anchor items are modest, a reliable car that's a few years old, a functional watch that tells time without making a statement, shoes that are good but not notable, then the maintenance costs of your identity are low. Nobody expects you to wear a $2,000 suit if you drive a 10-year-old pickup. Nobody expects a luxury vacation if you wear a $50 watch. The anchor sets the standard, and modest anchors set low standards, and low standards are cheap to maintain. There's a freedom in this that's hard to describe until you've felt it. I owned a car for 3 years that I bought for $4,000 cash. It had 140,000 miles on it when I got it, and it ran fine, and I drove it without ceremony. I ate in it. I threw things in the back. Once a bird left an aggressive deposit on the windshield, and I left it there for a week because I was busy and also because who cares? I was the master of that car. When I traded up to something newer, something nicer, something that fit better with the story I was starting to tell about myself, I thought I was gaining something. I was gaining a monthly payment, an insurance increase, and a persistent low-level anxiety about door dings in parking lots. I was gaining a relationship with an object that was more complicated and more expensive and less free than the one I'd had before. The old car cost me nothing but fuel and maintenance. The new car cost me that plus the new wheels of every chain reaction. Here's what I want you to hold on to. There is nothing wrong with wanting nice things. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I'm not interested in a lecture about materialism or the spiritual emptiness of consumer culture, because that lecture never helped anyone, and it usually comes from people who already have enough and have the luxury of not wanting more. You can want nice things, but you need to see the game. Consumerism is not designed to make you happy. It's designed to make you feel almost happy, to position happiness perpetually one purchase ahead of you, just out of reach, attainable in principle, but always requiring one more thing. The game is designed so that you can never finish it. There is no version of the game where you have everything you need. There's only the current purchase and the next one. Diderot figured this out in 1765, and it cost him everything he had. He wrote the essay. He called the robe what it was, a trap, a master in the shape of a luxury. He knew by the end exactly what had happened to him, and then from everything I've read, he more or less kept spending anyway. Because knowing the mechanism doesn't automatically break it. What breaks it is building habits that interrupt it. What breaks it is asking different questions before the purchase instead of wiser ones after. What breaks it is treating the chain reaction cost as the real cost and refusing to buy things you can only afford in pieces. The charger is still in the drawer. I took the phone out last week to look at it. It's fine. Still works, still charges, still gets messages from people I care about and shows me videos I don't need to see at midnight. The screen has no crack. The case is clean. The whole system is coherent and polished and correct. And I think about the old phone sometimes. The cracked screen, the battery that needed to be plugged in early, the cable I bought in an airport, worn at the ends from 2 years of daily use. The phone I threw in my bag without thinking about it, that I used without ceremony, that I was the absolute master of. I don't miss it exactly, but I understand something about it now that I couldn't see when I had it. It was mine in a way the new one isn't quite. The new one I protect, the old one I used. There's a difference there that sounds small until you sit with it. When Diderot had his old robe, he wiped his pen on it. Think about that. He wiped ink on the thing he wore because it was his, because it was functional, because its purpose was to serve him and not the other way around. The robe was a tool. He was its master. After the new robe, the magnificent, expensive, scarlet statement of a robe, he became terrified of ruining it. He moved differently in it. He sat differently. He was stiff. He had bought freedom with a robe, and the robe had bought him back. This is not a story about money. Or it is, but only on the surface. Underneath, it's a story about who owns whom, about the direction of obligation, about whether your things serve your life or your life serves your things. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, not enslaved, not free, carrying a mixed portfolio of objects we use freely and objects we curate anxiously, some of which we chose and some of which were chosen for us by the chain reactions we set in motion without meaning to. The The question to sit with isn't, do I have too much stuff? The question is, what owns you? Which objects do you move carefully around? Which ones do you protect to a degree that's started to feel like obligation? Which things in your life are you servicing instead of using? Because you will not always notice when the trade happens. Diderot didn't notice. He was a brilliant man, a philosopher, someone who spent his life thinking about how the mind works, and he didn't notice until it was over and he was broke again, and the robe was hanging there like a verdict. You will buy a robe you probably already have. The question is what it's going to cost you before you figure out what it is. The junk drawer is a strange kind of archive. I opened it again this morning, not looking for anything, just the way you open drawers sometimes, not for a reason. The charger was there. The dead pen, the pizza coupon for the place that closed. I picked up the charger. Held it for a moment, put it back. I don't know what I'm keeping it for. Maybe for nothing. Maybe for a phone that no longer exists, in a version of my life that I traded away without noticing, for a titanium device that I protect too carefully and use too anxiously, and will probably sell in 18 months when something sleeker arrives, and the ads start their patient 3-month preparation. I should throw it away. I probably won't. There's something in keeping it that I'm not ready to name yet. Not sentiment exactly, not regret exactly, something smaller and quieter than either. The drawer closed. The phone was on the counter, face up in its leather case. I picked it up without thinking. I set it down again, carefully on the soft part of the counter, away from the edge.